Okay, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, this second half of the semester has been a little different from the first half. I'm not going to really attempt to do a lecture or anything because this is a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I would like to go through module 4A and just make sure everybody is comfortable with it. I have eliminated the papers, so you won't need to do those. And I can say that the review for quiz 7 is going to cover everything that will be on quiz 7. And I'll try to go over that again before you actually take the quiz. Are there any questions right now?
So I actually did have a couple of questions. I always do, and I'm sorry. I just like to keep up with everything. But I saw, I think it was the end of last week, you had posted another quiz 1 and another quiz 2 that are different than the first two. Are we supposed to take those, or was that just for like substituting for someone?
That was actually for students that missed it. So you don't need to take it again. Yours is already recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so just ignore that. Some of the stuff I may open again for people that have missed it. So if you've already done it, don't worry about it. Okay, so module 4A, neuropsychology and higher cognitive functioning, language and brain. Okay. Okay, we don't need to worry about the rubric, at least until the essay questions. And as always, the script has everything that you really need to know as far as any testing goes. Of course, when you want to go deeper, there's the textbook, and there's also some required readings here, but you won't directly be tested on those. This slide talks about, of course, brain damage. The main brain damage that we see clinically are strokes, which can be from a clot or can be from a rupture of a vessel. And it can damage basically any part of the brain, just depending on where the lesion is. Traumatic brain injury also is a common thing, seen often in automobile accidents and soldiers, and can cause permanent brain damage. But because of plasticity, the brain can compensate and take over some of the lost function of the parts of the brain. Tumors, infections, toxins are other things that cause problems. And of course, there's genetic and viral nutritional. Epilepsy, of course, is when there's electrical activity out of control, and just like with a computer, the brain gets totally confused. There are different types of seizures. There's grand mal that involves the whole brain, and there's petit mal that may be localized to a certain region. There are absent seizures where the person doesn't have any motor disruption, but they just stare blankly into space for a number of seconds or a number of minutes. This is where the EEG is important if you can capture it, and it can tell you the localization and the degree of the seizure activity. And of course, functional MRI they're pretty expensive, but they are sometimes used as well. Neurodegenerative diseases, of course, Alzheimer's. No cure for Alzheimer's yet. It's caused by amyloid plaques forming in the brain and causing death of neurons. And usually it's the acetylcholine producing neurons. And it causes a global loss of memory. Usually the short-term memory is the first to go, and even in advanced cases, many patients will retain their long-term memory, so they can remember childhood, but they can't remember what happened 2 minutes ago. Neurodevelopmental disorders, if you're working clinically, you'll see a lot of those. Attention deficit disorder, probably the most common. And as you remember, that's a deficit of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. Autism, basically the wiring, and there's some miscorrelation with emotions and with relating to people. Asperger's has a lot of emotional disruption. And of course, Tourette's is spontaneous speech, yelling, cursing that can be misinterpreted if people around don't know that the person has a condition. MR and PKU syndrome, less common, but many times patients may have to have very special care if there are behavioral issues there. Okay, laterality of the brain basically means that your brain has two halves and they have to work together in order for function to be normal. But interestingly, there have been cases where the corpus callosum has been cut, which is the part that joins the two halves of the brain together. And this was usually done in seizure disorders to keep the seizure from spreading from one side to the other. And a lot of information has been gained from that. But again, the brain is so complex that there's no simple explanation for basically anything, but what we do know is that it works in concert. It was once believed that the right brain was just used for artistic endeavors and creativity, and that the left brain was mainly for logic and math. And it is true that there's a dominant side, but you cannot rule out the other side as well because it has input. About most of the population is right-handed, but left-handed people tend to develop very much in the same way. And whether you're right-handed or left-handed depends on the crossing of the nerves at a certain level. So the left side of the body is controlled by the right side of the brain and vice versa. we know very well that language is basically located in the left hemisphere. The two areas that are most important are Wernicke's and Broca's. Broca's area is in the frontal lobe, and Wernicke's is located in the temporal lobe. And there is a part that joins them together. Being in the frontal lobe, Broca's is responsible for expressive aphasia, which is a person that has this condition. They can understand perfectly what they are hearing or seeing, but they have dysarthric speech, which means that it's not enunciated properly and they are not able to be understood most of the time. Wernicke's, there is an issue with processing what is heard. So a person may hear normally, but they're not able to make sense out of it, and they are perfectly fluent. Their fluency is not affected, but their sense doesn't make any sense. So they may just have a word salad or speech that is mixed up and doesn't have any real meaning. So both of these are majority of the time on the left side of the brain. And these PowerPoints just summarize basically the script, which has more detailed information. Okay, I don't think you need to spend a whole lot of time on this. But you do want to be quite familiar with Broca's and Wernicke's and the connection with the arcuate fasciculus and angular gyrus, which join the two together, and in concert they allow human beings to use the gift of language. And this is probably the most highly developed part of the brain. Excuse me 1 second. Yeah, I'm gonna finish this class. Sorry about that. Of course, the basal ganglia and thalamus are involved in language just in the same way they are with repetitive movements and habitual behaviors. This is a picture of the brain that pretty much entails all that's involved in communication and language. And as I mentioned previously, Wernicke's area is right in this part of the temporal lobe, and Broca's area is in the posterior part of the frontal lobe. And this, of course, is the fasciculus that joins the two together. The motor cortex is part of the frontal lobe and is partially responsible for the lip movement and other muscle movements that are required for speech. In Wernicke's area, it's more sensory process and more so than a motor process. And the nerves of the ear, the otic nerve is the main input, but of course the visual cortex also can provide information by things that we see. And this is a primary auditory cortex. Clinically, condition you see a lot in kids is called auditory processing defect. And it's something that's usually determined by tests with an audiologist and also psychological testing. So sometimes they may be initially misdiagnosed as having ADHD or some other developmental disorder, but it turns out to be central processing auditory disorder. That's the clinical name that's usually applied to it. So be familiar with this diagram here. And this was just an example of someone with Broca's. And I didn't totally get the whole thing, but I realized that he understood what was said, and he understood that it was a joke, but he responded inappropriately. But that was one of Dr. Adams' slides, so I didn't really get into the details of it. DiMaggio study was done at the, I think, University of Iowa by a team, and they studied a condition called anomia. Anomia is when a person sees something, but they just can't think of the name of it, even if they know it well. It's right on the tip of their tongue, but they're just not able to retrieve it. The temporal lobe is intimately involved with that. Okay, and there were, as I said, some readings there, but there definitely won't be any details that you need to regurgitate. There was a video of a particular culture and language called a click language that you might just want to watch. Dyslexia is just something that you want to have a general understanding of, and it's how the brain processes information in a way that's different from majority of the population. And it is something that can be remedied with enough therapy and treatment. And I think the take home to most of this was that there can be brain physical changes noted when the person is treated for dyslexia. But it is just one of those things you want to be aware of and want to know generally something about it. Phonetics, that's another important part of language and speech, but we don't really go into any detail here, but you just need to have an understanding of what it is. Okay, I'm not sure the significance of this picture here. And of course, this is Brodmann's area of the brain map, which is something you may see in later courses, but I'm not going to go into any detail there, but it's just showing some anatomical features. Okay, and as I've mentioned before, most of this stuff is just self-study stuff. I'm sure that what you're mainly concerned about is the, of course, quiz. And as I mentioned, the quiz, nothing that's not on this review will be on the quiz. And it's, the review fits on one page, so it's not really a lot of detail there. I think the place where I'm having most concern right now is timing things. Does anyone know off the top of their head when the semester ends?
I think the week of December 6th is when we start exams. It's either that week, like I think it starts the end of that week and goes into the beginning of the next week.
Okay, December 6th. Okay, well, I need to kind of get the dates so you have plenty of time to do everything.
I think maybe the first exam day is actually the 8th.
Okay. Okay, do you know when the last exam date is? Or?
Hang on 1 second. I'll try and pull it up because I think there's a calendar.
Yeah, I had a calendar, but I misplaced it.
Okay, so it says, let's see. So December the 7th is the first exam day, and the last exam day is December the 13th.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure you have enough time to get prepared, so it'll probably be the 12th or 13th. But I'll look over it today and see how things work out. We'll go over 4B next week. And just keep working. We're coming down the home stretch right now. Most that has to do with your grades has already been covered. Of course, is exam 3 and the final exam. But most students are doing quite well, especially the ones that are here today. But if anything comes up, just get in touch with me. And I'm gonna go over 4B next Wednesday, all right? Is there any concerns right now? If not, I'm gonna see you next Wednesday. Y'all have a good rest of the week.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.